Hello, so today's presentation is going to be about the drama triangle, sometimes known as Karpman triangle. So this builds on some of the learning we've already done in terms of transactional analysis. Thinking about Byrne's work, and so just giving underpinning principles to transactional analysis. Very heavily influenced by psychoanalysis in terms of ego states, but also humanism and social psychology as well. And there are a number of basic assumptions of transactional analysis. One of these is a motivational concept and the idea of strokes. So within transactional analysis, a stroke is an act of recognition from one person to another, and that can be either positive or negative. So it might be, positive interaction, or it might be criticism or rejection, but that is an act of recognition from one person to another, or a stroke. Another core concept is the idea of okayness. And this idea refers to a basic attitude of acceptance towards oneself and others. The preferred position in transactional analysis is an I'm okay, you're okay stance. So in terms of effective relationships, that is the preferred stance. I'm okay and you're okay. But there are three other positions which can lead people to experience difficulties, and those positions are I'm okay, you're not okay. So in interactions that can lead to rejection or belittling. I'm not okay, you're okay, and that can lead to avoidance of the other. And I'm not okay, you're not okay, which can lead to quite a depressive, hopeless attitude about life. Another core idea is about games. So there's a whole area of transactional analysis called games analysis. And a game in transactional analysis terms is a repetitive sequence of transactions between two or more people. So patterns of interactions. The unconscious purpose of games is that of enabling people to validate their life positions. So that might relate to this idea of okayness. And another fundamental idea is about scripts. And so within transactional analysis, there's a belief that a person's script is formulated in early childhood. And Byrne himself hypothesized that children need to find answers to existential questions such as what kind of person am I, and what happens to people like me, and that they'll be making sense of those things in early childhood. There's a strong focus within transactional analysis on fairy tales, and if therapists using transactional analysis will quite often use fairy tales to tease out people's understanding or experience of roles. But in understanding people's scripts, it's recognising that fairy tales, like many people's experience of life, that actually the characters within fairy tales quite often have lives characterised by problems, challenges within behaviour, challenges in relationships, that their lives are not necessarily characterised by things which are seen as fundamental to healthy relationships. So in transactional analysis terms, intimacy, okayness, and giving and receiving positive strokes are seen as being the positive outcomes of working therapeutically with transactional analysis. So for a happy, healthy life and relationships, intimacy, okayness, and the ability to give and receive positive strokes is seen as fundamental. So Stephen Cartman developed the drama triangle in 1968, and he elaborated on an existing body of thinking and work from transactional analysis about games. So this area of transactional analysis called games analysis, and he developed this idea of the drama triangle. The drama triangle is a model of dysfunctional social interactions. Okay, so that's important to recognise. It's dysfunctional social interactions. And he identified that there are three roles that we can play in life that can lead us getting into some of these dysfunctional interactions. The frequently unconscious purpose for each player within the game is to get their unspoken needs met in a manner which feels justified and that they're okay with. Okay, so those are the principles that underpin the drama triangle. So they are dysfunctional social interactions, and that people will adopt a role whose purpose is to get their unspoken needs met. So moving on to the theory and the triangle itself. So it is an inverted triangle. That's the way it is ordinarily represented visually. And in thinking about, so it is about interaction, so there needs to be two people involved in an interaction, but that people will take one of these three positions. And Cartman stated that games tend to be initiated by a person who adopts the role of victim, so that the victim position is quite often the start of the game, located at the bottom of the triangle. So victims don't tend to think they have the power to change situations or themselves. So their position is, I'm not okay. So that's, if we go back to that idea of okayness, their position is, I'm not okay. So in this position, victims often feel that someone else might be giving him or her a hard time, or they're having a hard time in life, that someone else might be acting unfairly. That might be a reality, it might not be a reality, but that's how the victim feels. Victims do like to prove themselves right, so the future is often thought of as being difficult and hopeless from this position. It's a position where an individual doesn't need to take responsibility for anything for themselves, that often things get done for them. And they might think things about themselves that, for example, I can't do anything right. And again, this might come, if you have a tendency towards this position, you can go back and think about some of those ideas about scripts from growing up. So within this victim position, it is quite a hopeless position, where people might be feeling like they're having a really, really hard time for reasons that are outside of themselves, circumstances or other people. So that's the first position within the triangle. Cartman believed that games tend to be initiated by a person who adopts this role of victim, and quite often the other person will respond from another position. It might be that they respond from this position of persecutor, and so the persecutor role is a blaming and critical approach to the other person, where an individual might get their need to feel good from highlighting others' weaknesses. So it comes more from a position in terms of the okayness of, I'm okay, but you're not okay. So persecutors may not perceive themselves as persecutor, uh, but if they're perceived as such by the victim, then the unhealthy dynamic can commence. So this idea of persecutor is quite important in terms of, relationship dynamics. The persecutor can be someone who experiences feelings of resentment and maybe righteous indignation. They might stand for truth and justice, but can have an abundance of negative feelings towards people or situations. So that's the second position of the drama triangle. So the third position, and I guess as Cartman stated, the most common response once somebody is interacting with someone in a victim role, probably the more common initial response is from this role, which is the rescuer role. And within the rescuer role, the individual appears to be the most positive of the three roles, but Cartman believed that their help is not genuine. So actually it comes from a place of wanting to be needed, and that rescuers might actually seek out victims as this makes them feel better about themselves. Within this role, one is not open to any criticism, and some of the thoughts and expressions might be, I'm always taking care of everyone, I never get any thanks. With the position in terms of okayness being, I'm not okay, you're not okay. So people involved in this dynamic are often perceived as being, the helpful person within the dynamic. They are willing to help people who like the rescue position, who may adopt that position. They are willing to help and support. And it's kind of typical of people who would like to cover their inner side, which might be more of a victim position, because it does come from a place of I'm not okay. So to cover that inner side, the victim, with their willingness to rescue others. So there's a sense of them being experts. They know how to build the right relationships, and they start to depend on their role as advisors and carers. So those are the three positions, and these are positions that you will come across, or you might notice when you get out in practice. So where does the idea of drama come in? So Cartman talks about actually the drama, or the conflict or challenge in terms of relationships, relates to switches in role and location. So if you are interacting with somebody and they may be in a victim position and you're in a rescuer position, that actually those two can work quite well together. The victim feels quite hopeless and you're helping them all the time. Yeah. So that dynamic can work. The issue comes in when there's a switch. And the intensity of the drama is influenced from Cartman's work by these two ideas. So script velocity, the number of switches in a given time period, and script range, the contrast between the positions switched. So for example, and I guess where I want to draw your attention to this model is that quite often when we're working with vulnerable people, we will come into contact with people who are feeling hopeless, and are coming very much from that kind of victim position. It acutely reveals itself in working with dependent and codependent people. And more broadly with anyone who externalizes and transfers the causes of anything happening in their lives onto external events. So I can't do anything about it, these things are happening to me. And obviously that is, though, we will be coming into contact with individuals experiencing that regularly within our practice. And so when you come across this model within any of the social work literature, or when you get out in practice, it is quite often about us as practitioners getting into an unhealthy dynamic with the people that we work with. So we come into contact with someone who's responding to us from this victim position of feeling like they're having a really hard time, all of these bad things are happening to them, that might be reality, and that can draw us into the position of rescuer. But the rescuer position, this idea of okayness, is important, because in the rescuer position, you're perceiving the other person as not being okay, not having the resources, the strengths within themselves to make changes in their life. So we get into this position of trying to problem solve for people instead of empowering people to solve their own problems. So it can lead us to miss out on the assessment stage and move straight into trying to resolve a problem, and can get us into this dynamic of victim rescuer. And it is certainly a dynamic that I experienced a lot in practice, and that came from my own experience, from my position of not okayness, particularly when I first went out into practice, my own doubts about myself. So feeling like I'm not okay, therefore how can I be doing this job and working with vulnerable people. So it came from that position of okayness. And so the drama quite often came in. So if a service user comes in to see you and starts to describe maybe how difficult their life is and is coming from this place of feeling really hopeless, then that would draw me into this position of rescuer, of wanting to make things better, which comes from a place of me thinking that I know better. I know how to build relationships, and I know what is right for that person. So the dynamic is I start making suggestions. So the dynamic would be within substance services, a service user saying, well, I've been using substances for a while, and I'm stuck. I just don't know what to do about it. And so I would say, well, why don't you go and see your doctor? And quite often, if you get into this dynamic of victim rescuer, what you will hear from the victim is, yes, but. So it's really important that you start to become aware of those two words, yes, but. That was really important for me in practice, because when I heard that, I had to reflect on, have I got into this victim rescuer dynamic? So the service user would say, yeah, well, I would go to the doctor, but they're really unhelpful. Okay, so then I am continuing in my role of rescuer by making another suggestion. Okay, well, what about going to see another doctor? Yeah, but I've tried to see all the other doctors and they're all rubbish. Hopeless position. Okay, so I'm then taking responsibility for the victim, and I'm going to make some more suggestions. Okay, so what about you go to the clinic here and speak to the doctor here? Yeah, but I would, but I know, but there's some people who I don't want to see in the clinic, so I don't really think that's an option. Okay, responsibility back on me. Okay, so what about you try to reduce yourself at home? Yeah, I've tried to do that lots of times, but it just doesn't work. Okay, so you can see what the dynamic is, that the service user is remaining in that victim position, and I have got into this dynamic of making lots of suggestions of what they can do. So that can continue for some considerable time in my experience, until it comes to a point where I have exhausted all of my possible ideas in relation to that service user. And that's when you might start to get to a place where you get a switch in role. So Cartman believed that the most common switch when you've got into that dynamic is that there's one rotation, so the rescuer switches to the victim position. That's he felt was the most common switch. The rescuer switches to the victim position of feeling hopeless, because I've tried all of these things now and it's made no difference. So I just don't know what to do. I'm useless. I'm useless as a social worker because I've made all these suggestions and nothing has helped. And the victim switches to persecutor. Well, I've been coming to see you for weeks and weeks now and nothing's ever different. You are rubbish. And that's where there's a drama. That's where the relationship can become fraught. Or you might get a switch from rescuer to persecutor, where, you know, here I am, I've made lots and lots of suggestions, and come on, you need to do something yourself. I've made lots of suggestions, and all you're doing is putting barriers in the way. You know, just sort it out. So actually you've switched from rescuer to persecutor. So that, within Cartman's view, is a bigger contrast between the positions switched, so that can lead to more drama. Okay, so I guess, you know, the ideal is, so what you know, of moving to more healthy interactions is to move outside of the drama triangle. So and you can relate this back to some of the previous learning we've done about ego states. So strengthen and reinforce the adult ego state and move to a position of I'm okay and you're okay. You might be experiencing difficulties at the moment, but actually you are fundamentally okay and the solutions to your problems are within you. And I have the skills and the ability to try and support you to move towards that place. So you might also, you know, be aware of these rules within the people that you work with and their networks. I was very aware of this when I was working with families affected by substance use. So, you know, the child might be using substances and the adult is trying to do everything to resolve that person's issues, making lots of suggestions, taking them to the doctors, locking them up, you know, doing all of these things, which would be a victim rescuer dynamic. And that sometimes that can switch and there can be massive blow-ups or conflict that can happen. So I guess, you know, I'm not expecting, you know, transactional analysis can be used for quite kind of in-depth therapy. I'm not expecting you obviously, you know, there's the quick whistle-stop tour. I guess I'm presenting it to you for you to be aware of in terms of your interactions with service users, because I think anyone who is drawn to the helping professions values from looking at their reasons for doing that, you know, because we're drawn to it quite often because of our own experiences and what that might mean for the positions that we take in terms of transactional analysis. So for myself, there was this drive to want to help people that was about me trying to move myself out of this victim position and to be in a position where actually, you know, I'm able to help others, but actually that can be quite a disempowering position. So you can make some of those links with anti-oppressive perspectives as well, I think, when you think about these positions within the triangle. So that is a quick whistle-stop tour, but these are the references. You can find the top one, Cartman's, just by Googling it. It's widely available on the internet, but it is quite hard going. I guess in terms of thinking about it from a social work perspective, Thompson's book is pretty good, but the MacLeod Introduction to Counselling has a really good chapter on transactional analysis if you want to explore it a little bit further.